Before there were podcasts, there were radio shows, many of them call-in shows. I used to appear on these with some regularity to talk about whatever I had just written, and the host would often say, after eliciting my controversial thesis, "Give us a call. Let us know if you agree or disagree with our guest." And I would always wince when somebody said that for two reasons. First, the implication is that the listener has a fixed point of view which has not been and will not be affected by anything that I say. No new information is going to change that. And that's even more troubling, it occurs to me, when a teacher gives students something to read and then asks them to write a response indicating whether they agree or disagree. Again, it means no learning could have taken place from that reading. The other reason is, really, there are only two possibilities. You agree or you disagree. There's no nuance. There's no conditions or agreeing with part of the statement. I mean, if you can only see in black and white, it's time to get your TV fixed, you know? Or somebody once said, there are two kinds of people in the world, those who think in binary terms and those who don't. Today, I want to take a look at one particular dichotomy, false dichotomy that's common in both classrooms and workplaces. It's where groups are presented with something to decide or a controversial idea to take apart, and either they're told they have to come to an agreement about it, or they're supposed to debate. My take is that both of those options are troubling. Coming to agreement is sometimes troubling. Having to debate is always troubling. The good news is there's a third option that's a lot better than either of those. I'm Alfie Kohn, and this is Kohn Zone. So the first possibility that teachers and sometimes managers extend is the idea that you're supposed to all come to an agreement by the time the meeting is over. You're supposed to reach consensus. And I suppose in a classroom setting, it's better that everybody comes to a real consensus where people say, yes, I agree. That's better than voting. And voting, in turn, is better than having the teacher or the boss decide. Consensus is better than that. But premature consensus, where it's kind of enforced harmony, that's not really an incubator of good decision-making, effective problem-solving. It doesn't require courage. You know, companies that force everybody to agree on something tend to be tamping down objections because people don't want to be the one to hold up the decision and make the meeting last even longer, you know? Enforced harmony is how you get the Bay of Pigs invasion or the flammable Ford Pinto or something. Alfred Sloan, who ran General Motors 100 years ago, famously said to the board of directors, "I take it we're all in complete agreement on this decision?" Yeah? All right, in that case, let's postpone further discussion of the matter until our next meeting to give ourselves time to develop disagreement and perhaps gain some understanding of what the decision is all about. But not that many managers, facilitators, or teachers have that understanding that when everybody seems to be in complete agreement, that's when it's time to worry. Part of the motive for getting everybody to agree, not the only motive, sometimes it's just a matter of manipulating everybody to come to the predetermined decision or outcome that the leader or instructor wanted. Sometimes it's just, let's call a halt to this so we can get to lunch. But sometimes people favor consensus to avoid conflict. And Many people are conflict avoidant for various reasons, some having to do with how they were raised, and sometimes it's just because they think conflict is a bad thing. That's their ideological perspective. I would argue it isn't, unless you're defining conflict as something really unpleasant involving control or the abuse of power or manipulation or something like that. But conflict, the idea that we're pushing back on each other, is not necessarily a bad thing. And sometimes the absence of conflict may mean that people aren't that interested in what they're doing and they say, fine, I'm happy to sign off on that, which is not a good thing. Or it could mean a lack of gumption where people are unwilling to stand up and say, no, I'm sorry, I can't go along with that, which is what we're looking for and hoping, I think, to promote in kids as well. The absence of conflict in a classroom means you're not getting a full measure of learning. Real learning requires some degree of pushback, of disagreement, of clash. That's partly why the progressive leaders like Dewey and Piaget thought that collaboration in the classroom, cooperative learning, is so important, is precisely because it permits this kind of give and take, to stretch your thinking, to push and be pushed by each other to end up with a more sophisticated understanding. But sometimes that's not very pleasant. So the question then is, when does that turn sour? When does it go south? And the answer, I believe, is with that option number 2, the main alternative to reaching premature consensus, which is debate. Debate is not just conflict or disagreement. It's conflict or disagreement driven by competition, where there's mutually exclusive goal attainment, where it's a zero-sum game, where I'm trying not merely to persuade you, but to come out on top with a victorious argument. That's when conflict goes bad. You can smell the difference between a genuine exchange of ideas on the one hand and people scoring points to win a debate on the other hand. At a faculty meeting and at a dinner party, you can tell the difference. And I speak from some experience here because I have described myself for many years now as a recovering debater. I was a very successful high school debater. And at the time, it got my adrenaline going and it got me a lot of trophies. And it took me some time to realize just how toxic the whole activity is. Debate teaches a kind of cynical relativism, first of all. It says that no belief is inherently better than any other belief because any belief, any position can be defended if you're clever enough. In fact, the premium back then in high school or college debate is on not having any real convictions because that could interfere with your ability to win both on the affirmative and the negative side. Also, the goal, I began to realize, is not to be right. It's to sound persuasive and sometimes to talk so fast that your opponent can't cover all the arguments you're making and all the evidence you're spewing out there. The problem isn't just with the rules of specific debate tournaments. The problem is any time the goal is to win, that means other goals like learning or finding the truth are necessarily sacrificed. Understand, I'm not against spirited disagreement and challenge here. That's fine. But spirited disagreement is productive only in the absence of competitiveness. Competitiveness of the individual who feels a need to win, and in the absence of competition, meaning the whole structure of the activity being set up so that I have to beat you in order to prevail with my arguments. Oh, the more tournaments you win in debate, the harder it is to see how corrosive the whole activity is to authentic intellectual inquiry and, frankly, to your character, which is why I describe myself as a recovering debater. Debate teaches you to regard all conversations as a chance to score points. And speaking personally here, it was years before I was able to shake off my debate training and say, that's a good point. I never thought of that. Sometimes I wonder what happened to all the other successful debaters I knew. I wonder how many of them just segued into becoming trial attorneys, and I wonder how many ever figured out that the ability to think logically and speak fluently needn't be developed or used in an adversarial context. The larger context here of what I'm describing is not just about debate itself, informal or formal, kids or adults. The problem isn't just with debate. It's that debate is what happens when you add the strychnine of competition to a disagreement. And I have written at some length and spoken for years about competition more generally, undermining self-esteem, destroying relationships and ethics, leading people to become less interested in whatever they had to do in order to win a contest, and becoming less successful at most activities, not just disagreement, not just learning, but other activities where, surprisingly, the research shows that competition tends to inhibit productivity for both winners and losers. So, if it doesn't make sense to force people to reach consensus prematurely, let's all agree, and it doesn't make sense to debate, what does make sense? Well, I've hinted at the answer already in suggesting that conflict needn't encompass competition. The third angle, the possibility that is far more productive and successful, is what could be called cooperative conflict or constructive controversies. I mean, look, conflict is going to happen when you're playing with ideas with other people or making decisions together. It should. The question is, will the conflict take place in the context of competition or cooperation? That's the critical reframing. If it's the latter, if it's cooperation, then you get the best of both worlds. You get the passion of disagreement nested in a caring environment. You get civil discord. You get non-competitive argument. You get, and this is my favorite phrase, I wish I could claim credit for it, but it came from the brothers David and Roger Johnson, many years at the University of Minnesota, two brothers who cooperate in the study of cooperation. One day, in a moment of whimsy and elegant phrase-making, they called it friendly excursions into disequilibrium. It's not just a lovely phrase. It's a wonderful and a practical idea. If you're a teacher, the first step is to make sure that your students feel part of a caring classroom community, which takes time to build, to create a sense of safety, a sense of us, where it's not just about me, where our fates are linked. All of us have to succeed for me to succeed. And about building the social skills that help kids to learn how to respectfully disagree, to make eye contact, to challenge ideas without being insulting, and so on. And then you introduce conflict gradually so that the bonds that the kids have formed with one another can accommodate the mildly opposing views before you ratchet it up and they're thrashing out really incendiary issues. The Johnson brothers did a bunch of research on constructive controversies in classrooms. They found that approach, cooperative conflict, was preferred by most students of all ages to either concurrence seeking, which is what I was talking about before as premature consensus, and preferred to debate. It was also more effective for learning, more positive attitudes developed with peers, and they were more interested in the topic. For example, they did one study where sixth graders were supposed to be discussing logging and mining with an eye to the environmental and economic effects of those activities. It was a deliberately controversial set of ideas they were supposed to be working on. And the group that was in the cooperative conflict approach learned better than the other two approaches. Either you got to reach an agreement or you're supposed to debate. They had more positive attitudes about the activity and about one another. And that was true of kids at high, medium, and low ability levels. So, the benefits of cooperative conflict, which happen in good workplaces as well, and there's been separate research on the benefits of this in corporations and how much better it is than debate or than reaching an agreement come what may. But the benefits of this really kind of shine a light on the hidden costs of the other two options, what it's replacing, the pretense of avoiding conflict on the one hand, or the unnecessarily ugliness of debate. It's really a revelation, I think. We can disagree without seeing others as opponents to be bested. That's true in schools, and it's true everywhere else as well.